My father looked me in the eyes, called me a bad investment, and funded my twin sister's future instead. He had no idea. He just bought a front row seat to his own humiliation. My father didn't even raise his voice. That's the part I still can't shake. 4 years later, standing at a podium in front of 3,000 people, I still hear it. The absolute, clinical quiet of a man dismantling his daughter's future the way he'd reject a faulty tile sample. No tremor, no hesitation. Just the flat, practiced cadence of someone who has already made the calculation and found it clean. He slid my college acceptance letter back across the dining room table like it was an invoice he'd decided not to honor. "We're funding Briarwood," he said, looking at my twin sister Amber. Not at me, at her. Tuition, room and board, meal stipends, the entire package. Amber pressed her fingertips over her lips. The glitter in her eyes said she'd already known. Then my father, Grant Parker, commercial remodeling contractor, self-made man, architect of every room in our Denver home except the one inside my chest, finally looked at me. "Maya, we've concluded we won't be underwriting your enrollment at Northlake State." The air left my body in one slow, invisible exhale. "She's worth the investment," he said simply. A pause. The exact length of pause a man uses when he wants his next sentence to land. "You're not." I sat there for 3 seconds that felt geologically long. Then I picked up my acceptance letter, folded it once along the crease, and walked upstairs. He never called after me. That was the part that finished me, not the words, the silence that followed them. I need you to understand who I was before that table because otherwise none of what comes after makes any sense. Amber and I are twins, identical in the biological sense, separated by 60 seconds and an entire universe of parental interpretation. We share the same hazel eyes, the same honey-colored hair, the same face that strangers have double taken at since we were 7. But Amber had always been the version of us our father decided to believe in. She walked into rooms like she'd already been invited. I waited in the hallway hoping someone would open the door. I don't say that to be cruel to her. It's just true. Grant Parker ran a successful commercial remodeling firm out of Denver and governed our household with the same logic he applied to job sites. Capital flows toward highest projected return. He used words like dividend and yield at the dinner table. He evaluated everything, his employees, his contractors, his children, through the same cold spreadsheet lens. The man genuinely believed that feelings were data points for people who couldn't handle data. For 18 years, I had given him no reason to doubt the numbers. Straight A's through high school, national merit commendation, a scholarship finalist letter from Northlake State's economics department, which wasn't Briarwood but was rigorous and practical and carried the exact kind of no-nonsense merit my father had spent 18 years preaching was the only thing that mattered. I had brought him the proof of myself on a platter. He looked at it, looked at Amber, and chose. My mother, Elena, sat beside him during the whole thing and found the oak grain of the table suddenly fascinating. She was not a cruel woman. She was a weak one, which is its own particular variety of damage. That night, I sat in my bedroom, thrift store quilt, corkboard covered in color-coded study schedules, the particular silence of a room where no one is coming to check on you, and waited for the tears. They didn't arrive. The betrayal had skipped grief entirely and flash frozen into something denser, something that didn't move. At midnight, I opened Amber's discarded, dying laptop. The fan groaned. I typed into the search bar with fingers that felt numb at the tips. Full-ride merit scholarships for financially estranged dependents. The results were a graveyard of expired deadlines and essay prompts asking me to monetize my suffering in 500 words or less. But at 3:04 a.m., bloodshot and half delirious, I found it. The Hawthorne Fellowship, 20 scholars selected nationally, full tuition, a living stipend, elite mentorship, and, buried in paragraph 4 of the eligibility section, a transfer clause granting fellows expedited admission to a list of partner universities for their senior honors year. 20 people, out of thousands of applicants. I had exactly 0 political internships, 0 aristocratic pedigree, and approximately $200 in emergency cash from an envelope my father had slipped into my hand that morning with a post-it note that said, "Be pragmatic." I bookmarked the page. Then I grabbed a worn notebook and started writing a blueprint. Budgets, minimum wages, federal Pell Grant calculations. I wrote until my handwriting stopped being legible. Freedom, I had decided, was going to cost blood. I was prepared to pay. My departure from Denver was a masterpiece of familial indifference. Grant cited a contractor emergency. Elena claimed she was still tired from helping Amber prepare for Briarwood's orientation week. I dragged 2 scuffed suitcases to the Greyhound terminal alone, arrived at Northlake State under a flat gray sky, and moved into the cheapest room I could find, a listing that had advertised rustic charm and delivered slanted floorboards, a radiator that clanged like a blacksmith shop, and a kitchen that permanently smelled of scorched garlic. My alarm went off at 4:30 every morning. By 5 a.m., I was behind the counter at Sunrise Bean, an independent campus cafe that smelled of burnt milk and damp wool. I memorized espresso orders the way I memorized macroeconomic models, with desperate survival-grade precision. I smiled through aching feet. I smiled when entitled sophomores complained about lukewarm foam. I smiled when my brain felt like wet sand from studying until 2 a.m., and the alarm went off 3 hours later. After shifts, I sprinted to class. Front row, every lecture. Statistics, public policy, advanced economics. I wrote like every word was a rope pulling me out of a canyon. On weekends, I swapped my apron for rubber gloves and cleaned cleaned dormitory bathrooms and frat house stairwells. I never called home for help. I knew the script too well. They would frame my exhaustion as proof I'd chosen an inferior path, rather than acknowledge they'd shoved me onto it. Thanksgiving came. The campus emptied. I stayed in the slanted room with sodium-rich ramen and Amber's social media posts, her captions full of gratitude and blessing, our parents beaming behind her at the table I used to sit at. I closed the app. I ate my noodles. I opened my laptop and kept working. The collapse happened on a Tuesday morning in February. I was steaming oat milk during a rush, the machine hissing, the lines snaking to the door, the fluorescent lights doing what fluorescent lights do, when the lights suddenly smeared sideways into a single white streak. The sound dropped to a low roar. My hand reached for the counter and found nothing. When I blinked, I was staring at water-stained ceiling tiles. My manager, Denise, mid-40s, former Army medic, the kind of woman who ran a cafe like she was running a field hospital, was crouched over me, her face pale. "When did you last sleep?" she said. I genuinely could not remember. She confiscated my apron and told me I was banned from the building until Monday. I slept 16 hours straight and woke up in a cold sweat calculating the lost wages. That was the state I was in, a person for whom unconsciousness was a financial crisis. That same semester, I enrolled in an advanced economics seminar with Professor Nathan Bell. Professor Bell was a campus legend for the specific reason that students dreaded him. Late 50s, wire-rimmed glasses, silver at the temples, the stillness of a man who didn't need anyone to like him. He returned papers covered in red ink and held his silence long enough in lectures that students would confess things they hadn't meant to say just to fill the vacuum. I wrote my midterm thesis on labor mobility and hidden socioeconomic subsidies. I wrote it in fragments, on the bus, in the stockroom, wrapped in a blanket at midnight. I channeled every ounce of quiet fury I had been carrying since that dining room table into the argument that meritocracy was a myth, constructed by people who'd never had to acknowledge their own safety nets. I named the safety nets. I named what their absence cost. Professor Bell returned the paper with a red A+ at the top and 4 words below it: "Please remain after lecture." When the amphitheater emptied, I sat across from his desk with my hands folded in my lap and told myself not to apologize for anything. "Miss Parker," he said, tapping the thesis, "the empirical analysis is exceptional. The subtext is personal. What is your support structure outside this institution?" "Non-existent," I said, too tired to perform otherwise. He let the silence stretch. It was a practice technique. It worked. I told him about the cafe, about the rubber gloves, about the dining room table, the acceptance letter, the post-it note with the word pragmatic on it, about my sister's Briarwood orientation, and my father's use of the word dividend to describe his children. For a half second, Nathan Bell's composed face moved. Something cold and precise crossed behind his eyes, the specific expression of a man who has calculated an injustice and found it infuriating. He opened his bottom drawer and slid a heavy cream-colored folder across the desk. Gold embossed lettering, the Hawthorne Fellowship. My stomach dropped. "I've seen it," I said. "They take 20 people. I don't have the resume they're looking for. I don't have internships. I don't have connections. You have something considerably more compelling," he said, his voice like iron filing down to a point. "You have the documented, verifiable record of a brilliant mind operating under conditions that would have destroyed most people with twice your resources. Hawthorne specifically seeks that, and I am personally sponsoring your nomination." I looked at the folder, my throat closed. "Miss Parker," he said quietly, "people like your sister are told from birth that the world belongs to them. People like you are trained to be grateful for whatever falls from the table. Do not confuse their refusal to invite you with your inability to command the room." He leaned forward. "Open the folder." My hands were shaking when I did. The first essay prompt sat at the top of the page like it had been written specifically for me. "Describe the exact moment the architecture of your life collapsed, and how you engineered your own rescue." The Hawthorne application was the hardest thing I had ever done, and I had been scrubbing frat house linoleum at midnight. My first drafts were sterile, polished. I wrote sanitized resilience in careful, palatable sentences that kept my father's dignity mostly intact. I sent them to Professor Bell. He returned them bleeding red, scrawled in the margin, "Stop protecting the people who left you for dead. This is cowardice. Tell the exact truth." I sat in the freezing room for a long time after reading that. Then I opened a new document and I burned the whole thing down. I wrote about my father's voice, the terrifying calm of it. I wrote about my mother's fascinating oak table. I wrote about the specific humiliation of scrubbing dormitory bathrooms, while my sister uploaded photos of catered sorority galas. I dismantled the myth of my own independence, naming it for what it actually was: a story my parents told to make their negligence feel like a parenting philosophy. I stopped softening my anger and started using it. Denise wrote me a supplementary character reference without being asked. She typed it on her phone between the morning rush and the lunch setup and handed me a printed copy that smelled like espresso. "She comes in here looking like a ghost," she wrote, "and still remembers that the biochem professor is allergic to soy. The committee needs to know this woman is made of something different." I submitted the application on a rainy Tuesday in March. Then the waiting. The notification arrived at 5:08 a.m. on a Thursday. I was unlocking the front door of the cafe, rain misting my face, key in the deadbolt. I felt my phone vibrate in my coat pocket. Subject: Hawthorne Fellowship, finalist status update. My thumb hovered over the screen for 5 full seconds. I tapped it. "Dear Maya Parker, it is our privilege to inform you that you have advanced advanced to the final national interview round. 50 finalists, out of thousands. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the cafe door and let out a sound I hadn't made in 3 years. Not a sob, not a laugh, something between them. The sound a person makes when they've been holding their breath so long they've forgotten what air felt like. Denise arrived 9 minutes later, found me hyperventilating near the pastry case, and screamed loud enough to startle a jogger across the street. The final interview was conducted via secure video link in Professor Bell's office. I wore a thrifted navy blazer that hung slightly wrong at the shoulders. 5 panel members, faces I had researched for 2 weeks. They tested my economic models, my endurance, my long-range thinking. For the first time in my life, I didn't try to make myself smaller so someone else could be comfortable. Success, I told a silver-haired panelist who hadn't blinked in 10 minutes, isn't about proving my father's ledger wrong. That would still leave him at the center of my story. Real success is building a reality where his valuation of me is simply irrelevant. 3 weeks later, crossing the campus quad in late April, holding a burnt coffee, the notification came. We are thrilled to welcome you to the 2024 cohort of Hawthorne Fellows. Full tuition, unrestricted stipend, Tier 1 mentorship. My knees gave out. I sat down on a concrete bench and buried my face in my hands and cried, the ugly, violent, chest-heaving kind, because years of invisible weight had just vaporized in a single sentence, and my body didn't know what to do with the sudden absence of it. I called Professor Bell. My voice came out in pieces. I got it, I managed. I'm aware, he said, and then quietly, the foundation notified sponsors at dawn. I wanted you to find it yourself. You let me walk around all day not knowing? It was your victory to discover, not mine to deliver. Later that week, sitting in his office as he outlined the program's next phase, he slid a laminated sheet across the desk. The Hawthorne Transfer Clause, a list of partner universities where fellows were granted expedited senior year honors admission. I ran my finger down the list. It stopped near the middle of the page. Briarwood University, the Ivory Tower, my father's chosen investment. My sister's home for 3 years while I cleaned other people's bathrooms. If you select Briarwood, Professor Bell said carefully, watching my face, you enter directly into their honors track. Hawthorne scholars are frequently considered for commencement valedictorian. Given your GPA, it's probable. I stared at the word, valedictorian. Don't choose it out of spite, he said quietly. I know, I replied, but I won't avoid it to protect them either. I finalized the paperwork that night and told no one. Not Grant, not Elena, not even Amber. For my entire life, my existence had been measured against my sister's. This thing I had built from nothing, in the dark, with bleeding hands, belonged to me alone. I was going to keep it that way until the exact moment it couldn't be kept anymore. Senior year at Briarwood started under a sky so aggressively blue it looked like a film set. I arrived with the same 2 scuffed suitcases. The campus was a cathedral of generational wealth. Gothic archways, manicured lawns, students in effortless designer casual wear who had never once had to calculate whether a carton of raspberries fit into this week's budget. The privilege was atmospheric. You breathed it. I infiltrated quietly. I dominated seminars. I kept my head down and my work extraordinary. The first time I bought those raspberries without doing the math in my head, I had to stand in the frozen foods aisle for a minute before I could move. I wasn't crying about the raspberries. I was crying about every time I hadn't been able to buy them. I managed to avoid Amber for 6 weeks. The collision came on a rainy Thursday in the campus library. I was deep in a text on international trade subsidies, my Hawthorne lapel pin catching the lamplight, when someone stopped at the edge of my table. Maya, I looked up. She was holding an iced matcha latte, cashmere cardigan, perfect waves. Everything I had ever imagined Briarwood would give her, and it had. But as she stared at me sitting in the heart of her exclusive world, her face cracked open like she'd seen something that violated the laws of physics. How are you sitting here? She whispered. I transferred. Mom and Dad never said they don't know. She sat down without being invited. The matcha latte hovered between her hands. Maya, how are you affording this? Tuition here is, I won the Hawthorne Fellowship. The words detonated quietly behind her eyes. Even Briarwood students said the Hawthorne name in hushed tones. It was the summit. The thing you referenced to explain someone was in an entirely different category. You won the Hawthorne, she repeated. I did. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger wearing her sister's face. Why didn't you tell us any of this? I leaned forward. Because I needed to have something magnificent before Grant and Elena had the chance to dissect it, diminish it, or turn it into a competition. The flinch was immediate. The defensive response started forming on her lips and then died. In its place, something slower and more honest moved across her face. Shame. I didn't know how bad it was, she said quietly. You knew enough to stay comfortable. Before she could respond, my phone lit up on the table. Missed call, Mom, missed call, Dad. Then a text from Amber's number. She had apparently sent it before crossing the library. I just told them, please answer. I looked at the screen. Then I looked at my sister. You told them I was here. She didn't deny it. I gathered my books and walked out. The phone rang the next morning while I was crossing the quad in the California sun. This time I answered. I was no longer afraid of my father's voice. I had simply outgrown the room where it had power. Maya, his voice came through tight and controlled, the tone of a man running a damage calculation in real time. Your sister tells me you're enrolled at Briarwood. That's correct. You transferred without telling us. I operated on the assumption it wouldn't align with your financial projections. A pause. Don't be insolent. You're my daughter. Am I? The words came out calm, almost curious, because I distinctly recall sitting in the dining room while you explained I wasn't worth the investment capital. Has your portfolio strategy changed? I heard him exhale, long, controlled, the breath of a man who has just realized he is not in charge of this conversation. Amber said you won the Hawthorne, he finally said. His voice had shifted into something I had never heard from him before, something dangerously close to awe. I did. That's extraordinarily competitive, Maya. Yes. Another long pause. The calculator behind his eyes was running. I could feel it, trying to figure out how to retrospectively claim credit for the daughter he'd left at the bus station with $200 and a post-it note. We're flying out for Amber's graduation regardless, he said. We should speak in person. I'll see you there, I said. I hung up before he could respond. What he didn't know, what I had specifically ensured he wouldn't know until the moment it was impossible to contain, was that 3 days earlier, Dr. Vivian Cole, Briarwood's senior academic affairs director, had handed me a sealed envelope in her office and watched my face as I opened it. Inside, a formal letter on Briarwood letterhead. I had been selected as valedictorian of the class of 2025. I asked Dr. Cole to ensure the families were not notified prior to the printed commencement program. She looked at me for a moment, reading something in my face that I hadn't tried to hide. Of course, she said simply. Commencement morning was theatrical in the way only extraordinary amounts of money can manufacture. The Briarwood lawns were laid out in perfect rows of white folding chairs, the stage elevated against a backdrop of stone archways draped in ivy, the air thick with expensive florals and the particular nervous energy of families who have been waiting 4 years for this one photograph. The orchestra played something sweeping and significant. I stood in the staging area in black velvet robes. The gold valedictorian sash lay heavy across my shoulders. The Hawthorne medallion, solid, cold, real, rested against my sternum. I had not slept the night before, not from anxiety, from the specific vibrating alertness of a person who is very close to the end of something very long. From my position backstage, I could see the front row VIP section through a gap in the curtain. They were already seated. My father in a dark suit, professional grade camera resting on his knee, the lens angled toward the general graduating rows where Amber would be sitting. My mother in cream, clutching a bouquet of white roses imported from somewhere that charged for the prestige of the origin. They were radiant with parental triumph. They had come to document their investment paying off. They were looking in entirely the wrong direction. I watched them scan the crowd for Amber's face. I watched my mother say something to my father, and my father nod. I watched them settle into the comfortable certainty of people who have never once considered that the moment might not belong to them. The orchestra quieted. The university president stepped to the grand podium. Distinguished faculty, proud families, and the extraordinary class of 2025, his voice carried across the stadium. It is my distinct privilege to introduce a student whose academic record, whose resilience, and whose refusal to accept the limits others placed on her represents everything this institution claims to stand for. In the front row, my father raised his camera, pointed it at the general rows. Please welcome your valedictorian and our distinguished Hawthorne fellow. My father's finger moved to the shutter button. Miss Maya Parker. The sound that followed was a full second of complete, suspended silence. Then the stadium erupted. I stood up. I walked to the stage stairs and began climbing. And as I did, I let myself look, one clear, deliberate look, at the front row. My father's camera was frozen in mid-air, hovering, as if his arm had simply stopped receiving instructions from his brain. Then slowly, the lens dropped. He lowered the camera into his lap. The color drained from his face in a slow, absolute tide. Beside him, my mother's mouth had opened in a silent shape that wasn't quite a word. The bouquet of white roses tilted toward the grass as her grip failed. She caught them reflexively, but didn't seem to notice she'd done it. They were staring at me. The daughter they'd handed $200 and a post-it note. The bad investment. Walking across the stage at the institution they'd paid for someone else. I reached the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I breathed once. Then I spoke. Good morning. My voice did not shake. 4 years ago, I sat at a dining room table in Denver, Colorado, and was told by someone I trusted that my future was a poor financial risk. I gripped the edges of the podium. I was 18 years old. I was told that my potential wasn't worth the capital. That because I was quiet, because I survived without demanding attention, I could simply be left to manage on my own. The stadium was absolutely still. This was not the speech they had been waiting for. This was something else. I believed it, I said. I woke up at 4:30 every morning and steamed espresso and smiled at people who spoke to me like I was furniture. And I scrubbed dormitory bathrooms at midnight. And I ate ramen alone in a room with slanted floors on Thanksgiving. And I believed on some cellular level that I deserved exactly this. Because the person who was supposed to see my value had done the math and found me wanting. I found Professor Bell in the faculty section. He was watching me with the quiet precision he brought to everything. He gave one slow nod. But exhaustion is a brutal, effective teacher, I said. And what it eventually teaches you is this. Recognition and worth are not the same thing. Recognition is an external currency. It's distributed by people who are looking at the wrong ledger. Worth is internal. It exists in the dark. It exists when no one is watching and no one is clapping and the radiator is broken and the rent is due and you open a laptop at 3 wows in the morning and decide that you are not finished. My mother's face was in her hands. Her shoulders were shaking. My father sat rigidly upright, impaled. That's the only word for it. I am standing in front of you today not because someone decided I was worth investing in. I looked directly into the front row, directly at him. I am standing here because I stopped waiting for that moment and became my own investor. I executed my own rescue, and I did it without a single dollar of anyone else's money. I stepped back. The silence lasted exactly 1 beat. Then the stadium came apart. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. The kind that starts in the chest before it exits the body. The graduating class surged to their feet. Faculty rose. People I had never met were standing in the VIP rows, their programs fluttering. In the front row, Grant and Elena remained seated for 3 long seconds while the entire world stood up around them. Then Elena rose, trembling visibly. Grant followed. He didn't raise the camera. The reception unfolded under white tents with champagne and expensive flowers, and the particular warmth of a crowd that has just witnessed something it wasn't expecting to witness. Professors stopped me. Parents of students I barely knew took my hand and thanked me. One woman pressed a business card into my palm and told me she'd been waiting for someone to say that for 20 years. I was standing with a glass of sparkling water when the crowd parted. Grant and Elena moved toward me slowly. They navigated the space like people who were no longer certain they had the right to occupy it. My father looked a decade older than the man I'd watched raise his camera 45 minutes ago. Elena's eyes were bloodshot, her mascara tracking 2 careful lines down her face. "Maya," Grant said. His voice had none of its former architecture. No calculated cadence, no managerial calm, just a man. "The jobs," Elena started, her voice breaking almost immediately. "The cleaning, the cafe. We had no idea you had all the variables," I said, not unkindly. "You chose not to run the calculation." Grant's jaw worked. "That's fair," he said quietly. "That's completely fair." He was not a man who conceded things easily. I had never once heard him say those 2 words in that order. "I was arrogant," he said. "I was wrong. He stopped, started again. "I don't have a better word for it than wrong." Before I could respond, a hand appeared at my elbow. "Miss Parker," a warm, assured voice. I turned. A man in a bespoke charcoal suit, silver-haired, the kind of face that appears in the backgrounds of photographs taken at serious rooms in serious institutions. He extended his hand. "An extraordinary address," said James Hawthorne, founder of the Hawthorne Foundation, whose name was on 3 campus buildings and my fellowship certificate. "The foundation is deeply proud to have you in our cohort." "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne," I said, shaking his hand. My father's eyes had gone wide. "We're anticipating your arrival in New York next month," Hawthorne continued, his attention entirely on me. "The analyst desk at Hawthorne and Reed is ready. Vivian tells me you've already been in contact with the policy team." "I start in 3 weeks," I confirmed. He smiled, the specific smile of a man who is used to recognizing competence and finding it where others missed it. "Good, we'll see you then." He moved on. The silence that followed was long. Grant was staring at the space Hawthorne had occupied. His camera, I noticed, was still in his chair back in the front row. "Forgotten. New York," he finally said. "You have a position in New York. Senior policy analyst." Elena pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "But you'll come home first? Before you go? Even just for a few days? We could—" She stopped, regrouped. "We want to fix this, Maya. I want to fix this." I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I thought about the dining room table, the post-it note, the slanted floors and the broken radiator, and the 16 hours of unconsciousness that my manager had diagnosed correctly as starvation of sleep. I thought about Thanksgiving noodles and Amber's caption about being so blessed. I thought about 3 years of building something in the dark, alone, with no blueprint, except the certainty that I refused to be the story they had decided to tell about me. "I'm not returning to Denver," I said. "Maya, but I will answer the phone." My father exhaled, the longest exhale I had ever heard from him. Like something that had been pressurized for a very long time had finally found the exit. "Tell me what the invoice is," he said, quietly, without the corporate armor. "Tell me how to repair this." And there it was, his language, his ledger, applied now not to an opportunity but to a wound. I almost smiled. "There's no invoice, Grant," I said. "I already renovated the structure. That's not something you can retroactively bid on." I set my sparkling water on a passing server's tray. "But if you want to start a different kind of ledger, one built on honesty instead of yield projections, I'm willing to open the account." He nodded once. It was the nod of a man who has run out of arguments and has just realized, possibly for the first time, that running out of arguments is not the same as losing. It might, in fact, be the beginning of something true. 3 months later, my apartment in New York was a shoebox with extortionate rent and a radiator that clanged exactly like the one in Northlake. My window looked directly at a brick alleyway. On cold mornings, the draft came through the frame no matter how many times the super promised to fix it. I drank my coffee standing at that window every morning. It was the most magnificent place I had ever lived because I held the deed to my own peace. Elena's letters started arriving in August. Long, careful apologies written on heavy cardstock in her precise cursive. In one, "I understand now that we praised you for needing nothing so that we wouldn't feel guilty for giving you nothing. We called it independence. It was abandonment wearing a compliment." I read that one 3 times. Then I folded it and put it in the drawer. I didn't answer right away. They had made me wait 18 years to be seen. They could wait a season for my reply. Grant called in November. His voice came through the line ragged and honest in a way I had never heard from him. "I'm not asking for absolution," he said. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you, and I'm ashamed of myself, in that order." "I hear you, Dad," I said, using the title carefully. "I hear you." We talked for 40 minutes, about nothing. nothing important, about everything. Amber came to visit that winter. We sat in Bryant Park with overpriced lattes and cold air turning our breath to vapor, and she wrapped her hands around her cup and said, "I used to think winning their approval made me the victor. And now I think it just made me blind to the fact that you were freezing in the dark." She met my eyes, and hers were wet. "I want to know you without the scoreboard, Maya. If you'll let me." "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. 2 years after that graduation, Hawthorne and Reed promoted me to Director of Policy Analytics. With my first major bonus, I set up an anonymous emergency fund at North Lake State, earmarked specifically for independent students facing housing insecurity. No plaque, no ceremony, no gala, just a fund. Just an email that some exhausted girl would open at 3 hours in the morning, in a freezing room with a dying laptop, reading words that would tell her someone had decided she was worth it before she'd proven it to anyone. Because that's the thing my father never understood about investments. The highest return asset isn't always the loudest one in the room. Sometimes it's the one nobody bothered to look at. Sometimes it's sitting at the end of the table, next to the service entrance, quietly doing the math on her own survival. My father tried to close the ledger on me, so I opened my own, and I kept every single dividend.